Olivia Campbell clutched her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders as she watched her husband, Frank, slam another empty glass down on the saloon table. She knew by the desperate gleam in his bloodshot eyes that this night in Marysville, Montana Territory, 1873, would end like so many others with Frank gambling away what little they had left. What she didn't know was that tonight she was the only thing left to wager. The September air carried a bitter chill as dusk settled over the mining town. The boom days were long past, but the desperation remained. 3 years of marriage to Frank had taught Olivia to expect disappointment, but nothing prepared her for what came next. "I'll throw in my wife," Frank slurred, eyeing the whiskey bottle that Silas Denton, the saloon owner, dangled just beyond his reach. "Your wife." Silas's laugh was cold as the creek water in winter. "What would I want with that slip of a woman?" Olivia froze by the doorway where she'd been waiting, praying Frank would come home before he lost what remained of their savings. At 22, she'd already endured more than most women twice her age the journey west from Pennsylvania after her parents died, the hasty marriage to Frank who'd seemed kind when sober, and now this final humiliation. "She cooks good, keeps house," Frank argued, swaying in his chair. "Worth at least 3 bottles of your finest." "1 bottle," Silas countered, eyeing Olivia with a calculating gaze that made her stomach turn. "The regular stuff, not the good whiskey." "Done," Frank agreed without hesitation, reaching greedily for the bottle Silas pushed across the table. Olivia backed toward the door, heart hammering against her ribs. She wouldn't be traded like cattle, not even by the man who'd promised to cherish her. "Hold on there." A deep voice cut through the smoky air of the saloon. The crowd parted as Ethan Price pushed away from the bar. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a weather-worn face that spoke of years under the open sky. Ethan was known throughout the territory as a man who kept to himself, except when something unjust caught his attention. "She's not yours to trade, Campbell," Ethan said, his voice low but carrying the weight of iron. Frank sneered. "She's my wife. She's not property to be bartered." Ethan's hand rested casually near the pistol at his hip. "Especially not for cheap whiskey." The saloon fell silent. Even Silas, notorious for enjoying the misfortune of others, looked uncomfortable. "This ain't your business, Price," Frank growled. "I'm making it my business." Ethan turned to Olivia, his expression softening slightly. "Madam, you don't have to go with either of these men if you don't want to." Olivia stood frozen, aware that whatever she chose in this moment would forever change her life. Frank was a known entity, cruel when drunk, indifferent when sober, but familiar. Silas was worse by reputation. And Ethan Price was a stranger who'd shown her more respect in the past minute than her husband had in years. "I'm not going with Silas," she finally said, her voice steadier than she felt. "See," Frank slurred triumphantly. "She knows her place." "I'm not going with you either, Frank," Olivia continued, surprising herself with her own courage. "Not ever again." Frank lunged to his feet, knocking over his chair. "Now you listen here." Ethan stepped between them. "The lady's made her choice. Where do you think you'll go?" Frank sneered at Olivia. "You've got no family, no money." "I'll find work," she answered, lifting her chin despite the fear coursing through her. Silas chuckled. "Only kind of work for a woman alone in this town is up at Madame Ruby's." "There's work at my ranch," Ethan said quietly, still watching Frank. "My housekeeper left last month to marry. Place needs tending, meals need cooking." He glanced at Olivia. "Decent pay, your own room with a lock on the door, no strings attached." Olivia hesitated. The offer seemed too convenient, too good to be true. Yet something in Ethan's steady gaze told her he could be trusted at least more than the alternatives. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "Because no one should be treated like property," he answered simply. "And I need a housekeeper." Before Olivia could respond, Frank lunged at her, grabbing her arm. "You're my wife. You're not going anywhere." The next moments happened in a blur. Ethan's hand shot out, catching Frank's wrist in a grip that made the smaller man gasp. With a twist and a shove, Frank found himself sprawled on the floor, whiskey bottle rolling away from his outstretched fingers. "It's over, Campbell," Ethan said calmly. "You traded away any claim to her when you offered her for whiskey." Frank struggled to his feet, hand going to the knife in his belt. "I'll kill you first." The metallic click of a pistol being cocked echoed in the suddenly silent room. But it wasn't Ethan who had drawn it, was Sheriff Matthew Bailey, who'd entered the saloon just in time to witness the commotion. "That's enough, Frank," Bailey said. "Drop the knife before you make things worse for yourself." Frank's face contorted with rage, but after a moment he let the knife clatter to the floor. "This isn't over," he hissed, glaring at Olivia. "You made vows." "So did you," Olivia replied, finding a strength in her voice she hadn't known existed. "To honor and protect. Those vows ended when you tried to trade me like a sack of flour." Sheriff Bailey stepped forward. "Frank, I think you'd better spend the night in my jail. Cool your head." As two deputies led a protesting Frank away, Olivia stood uncertainly in the middle of the saloon, acutely aware of the curious stares from everyone around her. Her entire life had just unraveled in the span of minutes, and she had no idea what would happen next. Ethan Price cleared his throat. "My offer stands, Mrs. Campbell. No obligation, just honest work. You can leave anytime you want." Olivia looked up at him, studying his face. There was no leering, no hidden agenda she could detect in those steady blue eyes. Just a straightforward proposition at a moment when she desperately needed options. "I'll take the job," she said quietly, "but I'm keeping my own name from now on. It's Olivia Clark." Ethan nodded, respecting her decision. "Miss Clark, then." "My wagon's outside whenever you're ready to leave town." "I need to get my things from," she paused, realizing she couldn't bear to return to the small cabin she'd shared with Frank. "I can send someone for your belongings tomorrow," Ethan offered, understanding her hesitation. "Or accompany you now, if you prefer." Olivia thought of the few precious items that were truly hers: her mother's silver hairbrush, the small book of poetry, the quilt she'd stitched herself. The rest could stay with Frank. "Now, please," she decided. "I'd rather not return later." As they stepped out into the cool night air, Olivia was keenly aware she was placing her trust in a virtual stranger. But as the saloon doors swung shut behind them, cutting off the curious stares and whispers, she felt something unexpected: hope, faint as the first light of dawn, but present nonetheless. "The ranch is about an hour's ride from town," Ethan explained as he helped her into his wagon. "It's not much, but it's peaceful." Peaceful. The word itself felt foreign after years of Frank's drunken rages and bitter disappointments. "Thank you, Mr. Price," Olivia said softly as they set out to collect her meager belongings. "Not many men would have interfered." "Not many men worth their salt would have stayed silent," he countered, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "And it's just Ethan. Mr. Price was my father." As the wagon rattled down Marysville's Main Street, Olivia realized she was leaving behind a life of quiet desperation. What lay ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, uncertainty felt like possibility rather than dread. The small cabin Olivia had shared with Frank sat at the edge of town, its weathered exterior a reflection of their deteriorating marriage. Ethan waited outside respectfully while she gathered her few possessions. It took less than 15 minutes to pack everything that mattered into a single trunk. She paused in the doorway, looking back at the cramped space where she'd spent 3 years trying to build a life with a man who'd never truly seen her. No tears came. Instead, a strange sense of lightness filled her chest as she closed the door without locking it. Let Frank deal with whatever happened next. The journey to Ethan's ranch passed mostly in silence, broken only by his occasional comment about a landmark or his property. Olivia appreciated that he didn't press her with questions or empty reassurances. The night air was cool but not uncomfortable, and the rhythmic clop of the horses' hooves had an almost hypnotic quality that helped calm her churning thoughts. When they crested a small rise, Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop. "That's my place down there," he said, pointing to a collection of buildings nestled in a sheltered valley. Moonlight silvered the metal roof of the main house, a substantial structure that spoke of permanence and care. "It's larger than I expected," Olivia remarked, taking in the barn, bunkhouse, and corrals. "Started small, built it up over 12 years, Ethan explained with a hint of pride. "Run about 200 head of cattle plus some horses. Got 4 hands who work for me, but they stay in the bunkhouse. Main house is just me. And now you, I suppose." The implication of sharing a house with a single man, even as his housekeeper, wasn't lost on Olivia. In a place like Marysville, such arrangements often led to gossip. "About that," she began carefully, "people will talk." Ethan's mouth quirked slightly. "People always do, but my men know I don't tolerate disrespect. As for the town, well, their opinions don't much factor into how I run my life." He glanced at her. "But if you're concerned, I understand. I could arrange something in town instead." "No," Olivia said quickly. The thought of remaining in Marysville, where Frank could find her once he sobered up, made her stomach clench with anxiety. "I'll take my chances with the gossips." When they reached the ranch house, Olivia was pleasantly surprised by its interior. Unlike many bachelor establishments she'd seen, Ethan's home was clean and well-ordered, if Spartan. The furniture was solid and practical, the floors swept, though the place lacked the touches a woman might add. "Your room's upstairs, first door on the left," Ethan said, carrying her trunk inside. Bathrooms at the end of the hall got running water piped in last year. "Kitchen's through there, pantry's stocked. I usually take breakfast at sunrise, dinner at sunset, but I can fend for myself if you need time to settle in." Olivia followed him up the narrow staircase to a comfortably sized bedroom. A bed with a plain quilt, a dresser, washstand, and a rocking chair by the window comprised the furnishings. Simple but clean, and as Ethan had promised, there was a solid lock on the door. "Thank you," she said, suddenly overwhelmed by the events of the evening. Just hours ago, she'd been a wife dutifully following her husband to the saloon. Now she was what? Not quite a divorcee, not exactly a widow, something in between with no clear path forward. "Get some rest," Ethan suggested, setting her trunk at the foot of the bed. "Things'll look clearer in the morning." He paused at the doorway. "And Miss Clark, whatever happens next is your choice, remember that." After he left, Olivia sank onto the bed, the events of the night finally catching up to her. For the first time since she'd heard Frank offering her in trade, she allowed herself to cry not from sadness, but from the sheer relief of escape and the terrifying uncertainty of what came next. When dawn broke, Olivia awoke disoriented in the unfamiliar room. For a moment, she expected to hear Frank snoring or his demands for breakfast. Instead, she heard distant cattle lowing and the sound of men's voices as the ranch hands began their day. She dressed quickly in her second-best dress, she owned only 3, and pinned her chestnut hair into a simple bun. Her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand showed shadows under her eyes, but also a clarity that had been missing for too long. Downstairs, she found the kitchen empty but the wood stove already lit. A note on the table in a surprisingly neat hand informed her that Ethan had gone to check on a heifer calving and would be back by mid-morning. He'd made coffee, and she was welcome to anything in the pantry. Olivia set to work familiarizing herself with the kitchen, pleased to find it well stocked and logically arranged. By the time Ethan returned, she had biscuits baking in the oven and bacon frying on the stove. He paused in the doorway, hat in hand, looking almost surprised to find her there. "You didn't need to cook right away." "Cooking helps me think," she replied, sliding the bacon onto a plate, "and I prefer to earn my keep." They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, an oddly domestic scene given the circumstances of their meeting just hours before. "What will happen with Frank?" she asked finally, breaking the slightly awkward silence. Ethan shrugged. "Sheriff Bailey will likely release him once he sobers up. Can't hold a man for being a poor excuse of a husband." He hesitated. "If you're worried about him coming here, I am," Olivia admitted. Frank has a temper, especially when he feels slighted. He won't get past my men, Ethan assured her, and I've tangled with worse than Frank Campbell. He studied her for a moment. Though if you'd prefer legal protection, you could file for divorce on grounds of cruelty. Olivia had considered this during her sleepless hours. The judge only comes through twice a year, and divorces are scandalous, Ethan finished for her, but sometimes necessary. Have you ever been married, Mr. Price? Ethan, I mean. A shadow crossed his face. Once, long ago. She died in childbirth our first year together, both her and the baby. I'm sorry, Olivia said softly, understanding now why he lived alone despite his obvious success. It was 12 years ago, he replied, though something in his voice suggested the wound wasn't as healed as the time past might indicate. Life goes on. The conversation shifted to more practical matters: her duties, her pay, the rhythms of ranch life. Ethan explained he had 4 permanent hands: Miguel, who'd been with him from the beginning, brothers Tom and John Walsh, and a young man named Caleb who was learning the trade. They took their meals in the bunkhouse except for Sunday dinner, which was traditionally served in the main house. They're good men, Ethan assured her. Respectful, but if any of them step out of line, you tell me. The first week passed in a blur of activity as Olivia settled into her new role. She rose early to prepare breakfast, spent mornings cleaning and organizing the house, afternoons baking and preparing the evening meal. The work was hard but satisfying, especially when Ethan or his men expressed appreciation for her cooking. Each evening after dinner, Ethan would retire to his study to work on the ranch books or read, leaving Olivia to her own devices. She began exploring his modest library, surprised to find volumes of poetry alongside practical manuals on animal husbandry and farming techniques. On her 8th day at the ranch, Sheriff Bailey rode up just as Olivia was hanging laundry on the line. Mrs. Campbell, he greeted her, tipping his hat. Miss Clark, she corrected him firmly. I've returned to my family name. The sheriff nodded, accepting this without comment. Is Mr. Price available? Got some business to discuss. Ethan emerged from the barn, alerted by the arrival of a visitor. His expression grew serious when he spotted the sheriff. Problem in town, Matt, could say that. Bailey dismounted, lowering his voice though not enough to prevent Olivia from overhearing. Frank Campbell's making threats. Been drinking steadily since you took his wife. I didn't take anyone, Ethan interrupted sharply. Miss Clark made her own decision after her husband tried to trade her for whiskey. Bailey held up a placating hand. I'm just relaying what he's saying. Man's convinced you stole his property, keeps promising to reclaim what's his. Normally, I'd let him rant, but he bought a new revolver yesterday. Olivia's hands trembled as she pinned a shirt to the line. She'd known Frank wouldn't simply let her go, but hearing that he was actively planning to come after her sent cold fear through her veins. Ethan glanced her way, noticing her distress. Miss Clark, would you mind getting the sheriff some coffee? We'll join you inside shortly. She nodded gratefully, eager for a moment to compose herself. In the kitchen, she mechanically went through the motions of preparing coffee, trying to steady her breathing. Frank had always made threats when drunk, but he'd never owned a proper gun before, preferring his knife for intimidation. When Ethan and Sheriff Bailey entered, they ceased their conversation, but the gravity in their expressions told Olivia everything she needed to know. He's really coming, isn't he? She asked quietly, setting cups on the table. Bailey sighed. Hard to say. Most likely he'll drink himself unconscious before he makes it out here. But he left the sentence hanging, but we'll be prepared nonetheless, Ethan finished. I've already told Matt you're here of your own free will, working as my housekeeper. He'll make that clear to anyone who asks. Problem is, Bailey added, accepting the coffee, without a formal divorce, he still has certain legal rights as your husband. I'm not going back, Olivia said firmly. Not even if a judge orders it. Ethan's expression hardened. No one's forcing you anywhere. After the sheriff departed, promising to keep an eye on Frank and send word if he left town, Ethan found Olivia back at the laundry line, mechanically hanging sheets despite her trembling hands. "You're safe here," he said, his voice gentle but certain. "Am I?" She turned to face him. Frank won't stop. When he fixates on something, he's like a dog with a bone, and now I've humiliated him publicly. "You defended yourself," Ethan corrected. "There's a difference." Olivia sighed, pinning the last sheet to the line. "In your mind, perhaps, not in his." She glanced toward the road that led to town. "Maybe I should leave, go somewhere he won't think to look. Running isn't the answer." Ethan picked up the empty laundry basket. "Besides, where would you go? Another town where you know no one, with no references and no protection." He was right, and they both knew it. As a woman alone in the territories, her options were severely limited. At least here she had shelter, income, and some measure of safety. "I won't let him hurt you," Ethan promised, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You have my word." Something in his gaze, something beyond the simple pledge of protection, made warmth spread through Olivia's chest. It had been so long since anyone had put her welfare above their own that she hardly knew how to respond. "Thank you," she managed finally, taking the basket from him. Their fingers brushed briefly, sending an unexpected tingle up her arm. Ethan stepped back quickly, as if he too had felt the spark. "I should get back to work. The men are branding calves today." As he strode away, Olivia found herself watching his retreating figure with a confusion of emotions. Gratitude, certainly. Respect for his principles. But there was something else, something she wasn't ready to name, especially when her marriage, such as it was, remained legally intact. That evening, after Ethan had retired to his study, Olivia sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea, unable to focus on the book she'd borrowed from his library. Every sound from outside made her tense, imagining Frank arriving in the darkness. A soft knock at the kitchen door nearly made her drop her cup. Miguel, Ethan's foreman, stood respectfully outside. "Sorry to disturb you, Miss Clark," he said when she opened the door. "Just wanted to let you know we're taking turns keeping watch tonight. You don't need to worry." Olivia was touched by the consideration. "That's very kind, but you men work hard all day. You need your rest." Miguel shrugged. "Boss's orders. But even without them, we do it anyway. No decent man stands by when a lady's in danger." He tipped his hat and melted back into the darkness toward the bunkhouse. Feeling slightly more at ease, Olivia climbed the stairs to her room. As she passed Ethan's study, she noticed the door ajar, lamplight spilling into the hallway. She paused, then gently knocked. "Come in," Ethan called. She found him at his desk, ledger open before him, though his attention seemed focused on the revolver he was methodically cleaning. "I wanted to thank you," she said, hovering in the doorway. "Miguel told me about the watch rotation." Ethan nodded, setting aside the gun oil. "Just a precaution." "Still, you and your men are losing sleep because of my troubles." "Your troubles became mine the moment I offered you a position here," he said matter-of-factly. "That's how I see it, anyway." Olivia stepped fully into the room, drawn by the simple honesty in his words. "Why did you interfere that night in the saloon? You could have just minded your own business like everyone else." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, seemingly considering his answer carefully. "My mother was traded," he said finally. "Not for whiskey, for a gambling debt. I was 10 years old. Watched my father hand her over to a stranger like she was a horse or a saddle." Olivia's hand flew to her mouth. "What happened to her?" She ran away 3 days later, made it to her sister's place in Oregon. A hint of pride entered his voice. "Raised me by herself after that, worked as a seamstress. Taught me that people aren't property, no matter what the law might say about wives belonging to their husbands." "She sounds remarkable," Olivia said softly. She was. Ethan's eyes held a distant sadness. "Died of fever 8 years ago. But she lived long enough to see this ranch started, to know I'd made something of myself." Olivia understood now why he'd been so quick to step in, why he'd offered her sanctuary without hesitation. "She'd be proud of you for what you did." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Maybe so. He cleared his throat, as if uncomfortable with the personal turn of the conversation. It's getting late. We should both get some rest. Olivia recognized the gentle dismissal and nodded. Good night, then. Good night, Miss Clark. As she closed the study door behind her, Olivia felt a new understanding of the man who'd become her unexpected protector. Ethan Price wasn't simply a good Samaritan or a lonely rancher in need of a housekeeper. He was a man shaped by his mother's courage, determined not to stand by when history threatened to repeat itself. Sleep came easier that night, despite the lingering worry about Frank. Something about knowing Ethan's story, understanding his motivation, eased her mind. Whatever came next, she wasn't facing it alone. 3 peaceful days passed with no sign of Frank. Olivia began to hope that perhaps he'd given up, found another saloon girl to fixate on, or simply drunk himself into forgetting his vengeful plans. She fell into a comfortable rhythm at the ranch, rising with the sun, preparing meals, tending the house, and even starting a small kitchen garden with seedlings Miguel had brought her from town. On the afternoon of the 4th day, she was in the garden when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look up, shading her eyes against the sun. A lone rider was coming fast down the road from town, and even at a distance, she recognized Sheriff Bailey's distinctive gray horse. Ethan emerged from the corral, intercepting the sheriff before he reached the house. They spoke briefly, their expressions grave. Olivia set down her trowel, heart sinking as Ethan beckoned her over. Frank's disappeared from town, Sheriff Bailey informed her without preamble. Hasn't been seen since yesterday morning. Took his horse and some supplies. You think he's coming here, Olivia said. It wasn't a question. Seems likely. Bailey's weathered face showed genuine concern. I've got men searching the usual trails, but there are plenty of ways to reach this ranch without using the main road. Ethan's jaw was set in a hard line. We'll be ready for him. Just be careful, the sheriff warned. Man's been drinking steadily for days, makes him unpredictable. He tipped his hat to Olivia. Madam, if you'd consider coming back to town, staying in the hotel for a few days. No, her response was immediate. I won't be driven away from my home. The words slipped out before she could consider their implications. This wasn't her home, not truly just a place of employment and temporary sanctuary. If Ethan noticed her choice of words, he gave no sign. Miss Clark stays if she wishes to. We can protect her better here than in town. After the sheriff departed, promising to continue searching and to send deputies to check on the ranch periodically, Ethan called his men together. Olivia watched from the porch as he gave instructions, their faces growing serious as they nodded understanding. When the men dispersed to their assigned positions, Ethan joined her on the porch. I'd like you to stay in the house until further notice, he said, his tone gentle but firm. I can't just hide while everyone else puts themselves in danger for me, she protested. You can and you will. His expression softened at her indignant look. Olivia, the men and I know this land, know how to defend it. Having you safely inside means one less thing to worry about. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about hearing it in his deep voice sent a flutter through her chest despite the gravity of the situation. At least let me help prepare, she countered. I could load spare weapons, make food for the men on watch. Ethan considered this, then nodded. Fair enough, but you stay inside the house. As dusk approached, the ranch took on the air of a fortress preparing for siege. Miguel and John took positions near the approach road, hidden among the rocks that bordered the property. Tom was stationed in the hayloft of the barn, which offered a clear view of the surrounding area, while young Caleb remained near the bunkhouse, ready to sound the alarm if needed. Ethan moved restlessly between the house and barn, checking on his men, scanning the horizon. Olivia kept herself busy in the kitchen, preparing sandwiches and coffee for the men standing watch. When she carried a tray out to Ethan as he stood on the porch, rifle in hand, the setting sun cast long shadows across the yard. You should get some rest, he told her, accepting the coffee gratefully. This could be a long night. I don't think I could sleep anyway, she admitted, leaning against the porch railing beside him. The cooling evening air carried the scent of pine from the distant mountains, mingling with the earthy smells of the ranch. In another context, it might have been a peaceful moment. He might not come tonight, Ethan said, though they both knew it was just as likely Frank was already watching them, waiting for darkness to provide cover. If not tonight, then tomorrow, or the next day, Olivia sighed. He won't give up, Ethan, not until he gets what he wants. And what exactly does he want? Is it really you he's after, or just his wounded pride? Both, I think. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the mild evening. Frank never loved me, not really, but he considered me his possession. Something he'd earned by marrying me when my parents died and I had nowhere to go. Ethan's expression darkened. Marriage isn't ownership. To him it is. She gazed out at the purpling sky, remembering. When we first married, he wasn't so bad, worked steadily at the mine, only drank on weekends. But when the vein played out and the work dried up, something changed in him, like he blamed me for his bad luck. That's not how luck works, Ethan said quietly, nor marriage for that matter. Their eyes met in the fading light, and Olivia felt a strange tension between them, not uncomfortable, but charged with something unspoken. Before either could break the silence, a sharp whistle from the direction of the barn caught their attention. Tom's signal. Someone was approaching. Get inside, Ethan ordered, all softness gone from his voice. Lock the doors and stay away from the windows. Olivia hesitated. Ethan, now, Olivia. His eyes held hers for one intense moment. Please. She nodded and hurried inside, her heart pounding. Through the front window, she watched Ethan stride toward the barn, rifle ready but not raised. She should move away from the window as he'd instructed, but she couldn't bear not knowing what was happening. A rider emerged from the shadows of the approaching night, moving slowly toward the ranch house. Even in the dim light, she recognized Frank's slouched posture in the saddle. He pulled his horse to a stop about 30 yards from where Ethan stood. Though she couldn't hear their words clearly, the confrontation was evident in their postures. Frank gesticulating wildly, Ethan standing firm, rifle pointed at the ground but ready. The other ranch hands had materialized from their positions, forming a loose circle around the scene, though they kept their distance. Frank's voice rose, carrying to where Olivia stood frozen at the window. She's my wife. The law says she belongs to me. Ethan's response was too low to hear, but whatever he said made Frank reach for something at his hip, the new revolver. Olivia gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Everything seemed to happen at once. Frank's gun cleared its holster. Ethan's rifle came up. A shot cracked the evening stillness. For one terrible moment, Olivia thought Ethan had been hit. He staggered slightly, but then Frank toppled from his horse, clutching his shoulder. She rushed outside despite Ethan's earlier warning, relief flooding through her when she saw him standing unharmed. Frank lay on the ground, cursing and moaning, his gun several feet away where it had fallen. It's over, Campbell, Ethan said, keeping his rifle trained on the wounded man. Miguel, ride for the sheriff. You shot me. Frank's disbelief was almost comical. You actually shot me. Be grateful I aimed for your shoulder, Ethan replied evenly. Most men would have put it through your heart for drawing on them. Olivia approached slowly, stopping beside Ethan. Frank's eyes widened when he saw her, a mixture of rage and betrayal crossing his features. You, he spat. This is all you're doing. My own wife, living with another man, making me a laughingstock. I'm not your wife anymore, Frank, Olivia said firmly. Not in any way that matters, and you made yourself a laughingstock when you tried to trade me for whiskey. Frank lunged toward her suddenly, but his injury and Ethan's quick reaction prevented him from reaching her. Ethan's boot pressed firmly on Frank's uninjured arm, pinning him to the ground. That's enough, Ethan said, his voice deadly quiet. One more move toward her, and I'll forget my principles about not shooting a man who's already down. By the time Sheriff Bailey arrived with his deputies, Frank had been moved to the bunkhouse, his wound bandaged by Caleb, who had some medical training. The sheriff took statements from everyone present, his expression growing increasingly grim as the full story emerged. "Attempted murder, from the sound of it," he said finally, watching as his deputies escorted a sullen Frank to their wagon. "Plus trespassing, making threats. He'll be facing serious charges this time. Will it be enough to keep him locked up?" Olivia asked, voicing her deepest fear. Bailey nodded. "Territory's cracking down on this sort of thing. Between my testimony about his threats in town and what happened here tonight, he's looking at several years in territorial prison." Relief washed over her, so profound she felt her knees weaken. Ethan's hand came to rest lightly on her shoulder, steadying her. "It's truly over," she whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "Yes," Ethan agreed, though something in his tone suggested he was referring to more than just the danger from Frank. "It's over." After the sheriff's departure with Frank in custody, the ranch hands tactfully retreated to the bunkhouse, leaving Olivia and Ethan alone on the porch. The night had deepened around them, stars pricking the vast Montana sky with silver light. "I should thank you," Olivia began, searching for adequate words. "For everything, for saving my life, for giving me a home." Ethan shook his head. "You don't owe me any thanks. I did what any decent man would do." "We both know that's not true," she countered gently. Most men would have looked the other way that night in the saloon. Most employers wouldn't risk their lives and livelihoods to protect a housekeeper of less than 2 weeks. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. When he finally spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. "You're more than just a housekeeper, Olivia." The words hung in the air between them, filled with meaning neither was quite ready to articulate. "I should be going," she said finally, though the thought of returning to her empty room suddenly seemed unbearable. "It's been a long day." Ethan nodded, still not looking at her. "Of course." She had reached the door when his voice stopped her. "Olivia." She turned to find him watching her, something vulnerable in his expression. "I'm glad you're safe." "So am I," she replied softly. "Good night, Ethan." Sleep eluded her despite her exhaustion. She lay awake, replaying the events of the day, the image of Frank falling from his horse, the steady certainty in Ethan's eyes as he'd protected her. And beneath it all, the growing awareness that her feelings for her employer had progressed far beyond gratitude. It was too soon, she told herself firmly. Her marriage, failed though it was, had only just ended in the most dramatic fashion possible. She needed time to sort through her emotions, to establish herself as truly independent before entertaining thoughts of another attachment. Yet when she finally drifted into restless sleep, it was Ethan's face she saw in her dreams. The following weeks brought a gradual return to normalcy at the ranch. Frank's trial was swift by territorial standards, resulting in a 5-year sentence at the prison in Deer Lodge. Olivia testified briefly, enduring the whispers and stares of Marysville's citizens with as much dignity as she could muster. Ethan accompanied her to town for the proceedings, a silent pillar of support that made the ordeal bearable. With the immediate threat removed, Olivia found herself settling more deeply into life at the Price Ranch. Her initial role as housekeeper expanded naturally as she noticed needs around the property. She started a larger vegetable garden, began preserving fruits and vegetables for the coming winter, and even helped Miguel's wife Rosa with the seasonal mending of the men's work clothes. Ethan observed these changes with quiet approval, never questioning her initiatives, but providing resources whenever she requested them. They fell into a comfortable routine, sharing breakfast and dinner daily, occasionally discussing books in the evenings, though both carefully maintained a certain professional distance. As autumn progressed toward winter, the ranch's rhythm changed. Cattle were moved to lower pastures, final harvests were brought in, and preparations for the harsh Montana winter occupied everyone's time. Olivia found herself enjoying the sense of community as all hands worked toward the common goal of winter readiness. On a crisp November morning, Ethan found her in the root cellar, inventorying preserves. The small space suddenly felt much smaller with his tall frame blocking the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, ducking his head beneath the low ceiling. "I'm riding into town later. Anything you need." Olivia wiped her hands on her apron, mentally reviewing her supplies. "Some more canning jars would be helpful, and perhaps some fabric. I noticed the curtains in the sitting room are wearing thin." Ethan nodded, making mental notes. He hesitated, then added, "The judge is in town this week." She understood his meaning immediately. Though Frank was imprisoned, she remained legally his wife. A divorce would sever that final tie completely. "Are you suggesting I should file the papers?" she asked, carefully neutral. "I'm suggesting you have the option," he replied. "If you wanted to, that is." Olivia had been considering this very thing for weeks. With Frank's conviction, she had clear grounds for divorce on the basis of cruelty and abandonment. Yet taking that final step seemed momentous in ways she hadn't anticipated. Would it make a difference here? She asked, gesturing vaguely to encompass the ranch, her position, their arrangement. Ethan's expression was unreadable. "To me, no, you're welcome here regardless, but for your own future." He trailed off. "My future," she echoed softly. What did that future hold? Continued employment as Ethan's housekeeper, eventually moving on to another position, another town. The possibilities stretched before her, both exciting and terrifying in their openness. "I'll think about it," she promised. He nodded, seeming satisfied. "I'll be leaving after lunch if you decide you want to come along." After he left, Olivia continued her inventory mechanically, her mind elsewhere. A legal divorce would grant her true independence, the ability to make decisions about her own life without the shadow of Frank's legal claim hanging over her. It would also, she acknowledged privately, remove the final barrier between her and, what? Potential suitors? A specific suitor. She closed her eyes briefly, finally admitting to herself what she'd been avoiding for weeks. Her feelings for Ethan had grown beyond gratitude or respect. She admired his quiet strength, his unwavering principles, the gentle way he treated everyone under his care. Against all logic and propriety, she'd fallen in love with him. The realization should have been shocking, but instead felt like recognizing something she'd always known. The question was what, if anything, to do about it. Ethan had been nothing but proper in his treatment of her, maintaining a careful distance, despite the undeniable tension that sometimes rose between them. By the time she emerged from the root cellar, her decision was made. She would accompany Ethan to town and file for divorce not for him, but for herself. Whatever the future held, she wanted to face it unfettered by the past. The journey to Marysville passed quickly, the wagon rolling smoothly along the now familiar road. Ethan respected her pensive mood, limiting conversation to practical matters about the ranch and the coming winter. In town, they separated Ethan to purchase supplies, Olivia to visit the courthouse. The clerk was surprisingly understanding when she explained her situation, providing the necessary papers without the judgment she'd feared. Judge Wilson would hear her petition the following day, he explained, suggesting she return in the morning. This necessitated staying overnight in Marysville. Ethan arranged rooms at the hotel without comment, though Olivia caught the curious glances from the desk clerk. A divorced woman was scandalous enough. One traveling with a man not her husband invited even more speculation. "I could return to the ranch and come back for you tomorrow," Ethan offered as they stood awkwardly in the hotel lobby. "No," Olivia said firmly. "I'm through worrying about what people think. We've done nothing improper, and I'd appreciate your support tomorrow." Something like pride flickered in his eyes. "Then you'll have it." They dined together in the hotel restaurant, ignoring the whispers from nearby tables. Afterward, Ethan escorted her to her room, pausing at the door. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said quietly, "I want you to know I admire your courage. It doesn't feel like courage, she admitted, just necessity. His smile was gentle. Often they're the same thing. He hesitated, then added, "Good night, Olivia." "Good night, Ethan." She watched him walk down the hallway to his own room, fighting the urge to call him back, to confess the feelings she'd kept carefully hidden. Not yet, she told herself. One step at a time, the divorce proceedings were mercifully brief. Judge Wilson, a stern-faced man with surprisingly kind eyes, reviewed her petition, asked a few pointed questions about Frank's treatment of her, and nodded gravely when she described the incident at the saloon. "Mrs. Campbell or Miss Clark, as you prefer, the law has traditionally given husbands considerable authority over their wives," he said, peering at her over his spectacles. "But even the most conservative reading of those laws does not permit a man to barter his wife like livestock." He signed the papers with a flourish. "Your divorce is granted on grounds of extreme cruelty. You are legally free to resume your maiden name and all rights thereof." Olivia blinked back unexpected tears as she accepted the document. "Thank you, Your Honor." Outside the courthouse, Ethan waited patiently on a bench, hat in hands. He stood when he saw her, his questioning look answered by her tremulous smile. "It's done," she said, the paper clutched tightly in her hand. "I'm Olivia Clark again, legally and completely. Congratulations." His voice was warm with genuine pleasure for her. "How does it feel?" "Strange," she admitted. "Overwhelming. Wonderful." Impulsively, she embraced him, overcome with emotion and the need to share her joy with someone who understood what this freedom meant to her. Ethan stiffened momentarily in surprise, then his arms came around her, strong and sure. The embrace lasted only seconds, but when they separated, something had shifted between them. Olivia felt her cheeks warm as she stepped back, suddenly aware of the public setting and the impropriety of her action. "I'm sorry," she began. "I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize," Ethan interrupted gently. "Never apologize for expressing joy." They gathered the supplies Ethan had purchased and began the journey back to the ranch, both acutely aware of the changed atmosphere between them. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the road as Ethan finally broke the companionable silence. "Now that you're legally free," he began carefully, "I suppose you'll be considering your options." Olivia glanced at him, trying to read the neutral expression he'd adopted. "Options? For your future," he clarified. "You're a young woman, educated, capable. You could go anywhere, do anything now." The implication hung unspoken between them. She could leave the ranch, leave him, start fresh elsewhere. "Are you suggesting I should look for another position?" she asked, a knot forming in her stomach. Had she misread his feelings entirely? "No," he said quickly. "Not at all. You have a place at the ranch for as long as you want it. He sighed, uncharacteristically hesitant. "I don't want you to feel obligated to stay out of gratitude or lack of alternatives." Olivia considered her response carefully. "And if I stay because I want to? Not out of obligation or lack of options, but because I've found something there I value." Ethan's hands tightened on the reins. "Then I'd be very glad of it." The ranch came into view as they crested the final hill, golden in the late afternoon light. Smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney, cattle grazed in the near pasture, and the mountains stood guard in the distance. It looked like a painting, Olivia thought, and more like home than anywhere she'd been since her parents died. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Yes," Ethan agreed, though when she turned to look at him, he wasn't watching the ranch but her face. "It is." They returned to their routines in the following days, though subtle changes marked their interactions. Ethan lingered longer at breakfast, sharing stories of his early days on the ranch. Olivia found reasons to seek his opinion on household matters that didn't strictly require his input. Their evening conversations stretched later into the night, covering topics far beyond the day-to-day operations of the ranch. The first snowfall came in early December, blanketing the valley in pristine white. Olivia woke to find the world transformed, rushing downstairs like an excited child to take in the view from the porch. Ethan found her there, wrapped in a shawl, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "First snow is always special," he remarked, joining her at the railing. "It's magical," she agreed. "Like the world is made new." He studied her profile, her cheeks flushed with cold and excitement. "Sometimes things are made new," he said quietly. "People too." She turned to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Ethan, I've been trying to find the right time, the right words," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "But I'm not a poetic man, Olivia. I'm just a rancher with more land than sense, according to some." Olivia's heart began to race. "I've never thought you lacked sense." "Then perhaps you won't think me completely senseless when I say I've fallen in love with you." The confession hung between them, as pure and transformative as the snow around them. Olivia felt tears spring to her eyes, not from sadness but from overwhelming joy. "If that's senseless," she whispered, "then I've lost my senses as well. Because I love you too, Ethan. I have for longer than I've been willing to admit, even to myself." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise on new snow, warm, brilliant, changing everything it touched. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. When Olivia responded, her arms slipping around his neck, it deepened into something more profound, a promise, a beginning. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected to find love again," he admitted. "After Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was over. And I never expected to know what real love felt like," Olivia replied. "With Frank, it was security, gratitude, but never this." Ethan tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch reverent. "I want to court you properly, Olivia. No rushed decisions, no pressure. You've just gained your freedom. I won't ask you to surrender it so quickly." His consideration touched her deeply. Another man might have pressed his advantage, might have assumed her feelings meant an immediate acceptance of marriage. Ethan's respect for her independence only confirmed she'd given her heart wisely. "I would welcome your courtship," she said, smiling up at him. "Though I suspect the conclusion is foregone," he laughed softly. "Perhaps, but some journeys are worth taking slowly, savoring each step." The winter months passed in a sweet haze of deepening affection. True to his word, Ethan courted her with old-fashioned propriety, seeking permission before each kiss, never presuming upon their shared living arrangements, treating her with a respect that made her feel more cherished than any grand gesture could have. They rode together on clear days, Ethan showing her the farthest reaches of his property, sharing his dreams for its future. On stormy evenings, they sat before the fire, reading aloud to each other or simply talking until the logs burned down to embers. Olivia continued her duties as housekeeper, but their relationship had transformed into a partnership of equals, each valuing the other's contributions to their shared home. The ranch hands observed the developing romance with approving smiles, Miguel going so far as to remark that the boss finally found his match. In town, the gossip eventually subsided as the citizens of Marysville grew accustomed to seeing them together, Ethan's evident devotion silencing even the most determined critics. Spring arrived with a riot of wildflowers and new calves in the pastures. On a perfect April morning, Ethan suggested a picnic by the creek that ran through the eastern edge of the property. The spot was one of Olivia's favorites, a grassy bank shaded by cottonwoods where the water ran clear over smooth stones. They spread a blanket on the new grass, unpacking the lunch Olivia had prepared. The air was sweet with the scent of spring blossoms, birds calling from the trees above them. After they ate, Ethan grew uncharacteristically quiet, fingering something in his pocket. "Is something troubling you?" Olivia asked finally, concerned by his pensive mood. He shook his head, a smile tugging at his lips. "Not troubled, nervous, perhaps." "You nervous?" she laughed softly. The man who faced down Frank without blinking. "This is considerably more frightening than facing an armed drunkard," he admitted, withdrawing a small velvet box from his pocket. Olivia Clark, I had a speech prepared, but now that the moment's here, I find myself without words except the simplest and truest. I love you. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. It was elegant without being ostentatious, perfectly suited to her tastes. Tears blurred her vision as joy welled up within her. Yes, she whispered. With all my heart, yes. His hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It was my mother's, he explained. She left it to me, said to give it to a woman of courage and conviction. I've never met anyone who embodied those qualities more than you. Olivia's throat tightened with emotion. I'll try to be worthy of it, of you. You already are, he assured her, drawing her into his arms. More than worthy, my equal in every way that matters. Their kiss sealed the promise, sweet and certain as the spring day around them. They were married in May in a simple ceremony at the ranch, attended by the Hands and their families, Sheriff Bailey and his wife, and a few friends from town. Judge Wilson performed the ceremony, smiling broadly as he pronounced them husband and wife. Never thought I'd see Ethan Price married again, Bailey remarked during the celebration afterward. You've worked quite a transformation, Mrs. Price. We transformed each other, Olivia corrected gently, watching as Ethan helped Miguel's youngest daughter onto his shoulders for a better view of the cake Rosa had baked. That's what real love does, I think. As twilight fell, the guests departed with good wishes, leaving the newlyweds alone. Ethan took her hand, leading her to the porch where they'd shared their first kiss months before. Happy? He asked, drawing her into his embrace. Completely, she assured him, resting her head against his chest. Though it seems almost unbelievable that a year ago I was trapped in a loveless marriage, and now you're exactly where you belong, he finished for her. As am I. They stood together watching as stars appeared in the darkening sky, the ranch settling into evening quiet around them. From such unlikely beginnings, a desperate trade in a saloon, a stranger's intervention had grown a love neither had expected to find. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been in the saloon that night? Olivia asked, voicing the thought that occasionally still crossed her mind. Ethan considered this. I believe some things are meant to be, he said finally. If not that night, perhaps another, but I'm grateful it was that night. His arms tightened around her. Every day since has been a gift. Even when I burned the biscuits last week, she teased. Even then, he confirmed solemnly, though his eyes twinkled. Though perhaps especially when you stood up to those cattle buyers who tried to cheat us. The look on their faces when you pointed out the discrepancy in their figures. Olivia laughed, remembering the stunned expressions of the men who'd assumed a woman wouldn't understand the business side of ranching. They won't make that mistake again. No one who meets you makes the mistake of underestimating you twice, Ethan agreed proudly. It's one of the many things I love about you. As night deepened around them, they turned toward the house, their home together. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility and shared dreams. From the darkest moment of Olivia's life had come her greatest joy, proof that even in the harshest circumstances, hope could take root and flourish. 5 years later, the Price Ranch had nearly doubled in size and prosperity. A new wing had been added to the main house. Accommodating the growing family, Ethan and Olivia had welcomed twin boys, Samuel and James, now 3 years old, with boundless energy and their father's blue eyes. On the anniversary of their wedding, Ethan surprised Olivia with a trip to the creek where he'd proposed. The boys were left in the capable care of Rosa, who had become a permanent fixture at the ranch after Miguel was promoted to full partner in the business. Remember the first time we came here? Ethan asked as they spread a blanket in the same spot they'd sat 5 years earlier. Olivia smiled, smoothing her skirts around her. How could I forget? I was so worried about why you were acting strangely, I hardly tasted the food. And now. He unpacked the picnic basket, laying out the meal she'd prepared that morning. Now I know that when you get that particular furrow between your eyebrows, you're planning something. She reached over to smooth the very furrow she'd mentioned, though I haven't figured out what it is this time. Ethan captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. Perhaps I'm simply appreciating how fortunate I am. A thriving ranch, 2 strong sons, and a wife who continues to surprise and delight me daily. Flattery will get you everywhere, Mr. Price, she teased, though her cheeks warmed with pleasure. They ate leisurely, discussing plans for the ranch, amusing stories about the twins' latest adventures, news from town. Frank Campbell had been released from prison the previous year and had promptly left Montana Territory, reportedly heading to California. The news had caused a brief ripple of concern, but he had made no attempt to contact Olivia or cause trouble. I hardly think of that time anymore, Olivia admitted when Ethan asked if Frank's release troubled her. It feels like a different life happened to a different person. You're the same woman, Ethan said thoughtfully, just one who found her strength. With help, she amended, squeezing his hand. I wouldn't be who I am today without you believing in me first. After they finished eating, Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in silver paper. Happy anniversary, my love. Olivia unwrapped it carefully to find a delicate gold locket. Opening it, she found a tiny portrait of the twins on one side and Ethan on the other. It's beautiful, she breathed, immediately fastening it around her neck. I'll treasure it always. There's something else, Ethan said, an uncharacteristic hesitancy in his voice. I've been corresponding with a lawyer in Boston about Frank. Olivia stiffened. What about him? Nothing concerning, Ethan assured her quickly. It's about the land he abandoned when he went to prison. The plot outside town where your cabin stood. What about it? The small homestead had been forfeit when Frank failed to maintain it during his imprisonment. It was auctioned by the territory last month. I bought it. Ethan watched her carefully. I thought we might build a schoolhouse there. Marysville is growing again with the new mining operations, and there are enough children now to warrant a proper school. Olivia stared at him, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. To transform a place of unhappy memories into something that would benefit the community, provide education for children including eventually their own sons. That's perfect, she said softly. Absolutely perfect. There's more, he continued. The town council is looking for a teacher. Someone educated, someone who cares about children. I thought perhaps if you were interested. Me, teach? The idea had never occurred to her, but as soon as Ethan suggested it, possibilities bloomed in her mind. But the ranch, the boys. The boys are old enough for a few hours apart, Ethan pointed out. And between Rosa and me, we can manage them while you teach. The ranch runs itself these days, with Miguel overseeing most operations. He took her hands in his. You've helped build this life, Olivia. You should have the chance to build something of your own, too, if you want it. Tears stung her eyes at his understanding. While she loved her life as wife, mother, and partner in the ranch, there was a part of her that yearned for a different kind of contribution, a way to use the education her parents had sacrificed to give her. I would like that very much, she admitted. If you're certain it wouldn't be too much strain on you and the ranch. The only strain would be watching you deny yourself something you'd enjoy, he replied. Besides, it's only 3 days a week to start. The town can't afford a full-time teacher yet. 3 days would be perfect. She leaned across the picnic blanket to kiss him, pouring her gratitude and love into the gesture. Thank you for understanding me so well. I've had 5 years of study, he teased when they parted, and a lifetime more to perfect my understanding. As they packed up their picnic and headed back toward the ranch, Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From a desperate woman being bartered in a saloon to a respected rancher's wife with a teaching position and 2 beautiful children, it seemed like a dream. Yet the solid presence of Ethan beside her, the weight of the locket around her neck, and the distant sight of their ranch on the horizon were delightfully real. She had found not just safety but joy, not just escape but purpose. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked, noticing her pensive expression. "I'm thinking about what you said that night in the saloon," she replied. "That I wasn't property to be bartered." He nodded, remembering. "I meant it then. I mean it more now." "You gave me the chance to discover who I really was," she said softly. "Not Frank's wife or even yours, but Olivia, me." "You did the discovering," Ethan corrected gently. "I just provided safe harbor while you found your way." As they crested the final hill, they could see Samuel and James running in the yard, their high voices carrying on the breeze as Rosa supervised their play. The ranch buildings gleamed in the afternoon sun, solid and welcoming. Cattle grazed in the distant pastures, hands moved about their tasks, and smoke curled invitingly from the chimney of the home they'd built together. Olivia's heart swelled with contentment. From the darkest moment of her life had come this unexpected joy, not because she'd been rescued, but because she'd found the courage to rescue herself, with the help of a man who saw her true worth from the beginning. "I love you, Ethan Price," she said simply. His smile was as warm as the day they'd first met. "And I love you, Olivia Price, every day more than the last." Hand in hand, they walked the last distance home. Toward the future, they continued to build together equal partners in a love born from respect, nurtured by understanding, and sustained by the shared belief that no person should ever be treated as property to be bartered, but rather as the precious, irreplaceable treasure they truly were.